Okay, with all of the election stuff that's been going on, I've had no chance to talk about the Fed and what just happened between the Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve, between Mnuchin and Jerome Powell, not Sidney Powell, the Powell that I usually talk about on this channel. Sidney Powell is a new Powell to me. So this week, Steve Mnuchin decided that the Fed's special, lending facilities that were set up at the start of this whole Wu flu crisis to try and essentially bail out corporate America should cease to exist by the end of this year. And he says essentially corporate America has been bailed out. Big companies are doing fine. The Fed doesn't need to give them money anymore by just buying up corporate bonds. Which the Fed has been doing. I mean, that's the reason why. That's a big reason why we didn't have a big financial crisis. These corporate companies, these zombie corporations, really shouldn't exist, especially with what happened earlier this year. That should have wiped a lot of them out. The airlines, in particular, of course, but many other companies. They're so heavily indebted. They've been issuing bonds for years to buy back stock, which is it's just a scheme to boost their stock price, and CEO pay is it has to do, it's tied to stock performance, and so they're incentivized to essentially indebt the company for short-term gains in stock prices, and this creates lots of problems, and that's why we have lots of zombie companies in this country, and companies that, even if they're not technically in the zombie category, are in rough financial shape. And so this is a huge upset. If the Fed can no longer directly go in and buy corporate bonds, then they don't have as much latitude to try and keep corporate interest rates low. Because the thing is that the Fed sets they set interest rates, yes, but they specifically set the Fed funds rate. That's their main interest rate that they can manipulate, and that's the rate at which they lend money out to banks. And then the banks take that money and they lend it out to everybody else. And so if the banks are not interested in lending, in buying, what's the term? I guess the term would be becoming the primary dealer. I believe the corporate bonds work just like government bonds, to where a bank gives the I might be wrong in this, but I think that it works like a government bond, to where the bank comes in and fronts the corporation the money for this bond issuance, and then the bank will then go out and try and hawk these bonds and sell them on the secondary market. Or no, that'd be the primary market. But anyway, my point is that the banks play a role in bond issuance. And by the Fed having this facility to where they could directly go out and buy corporate bonds, that gave the banks an automatic outlet to hawk all these bonds. The Fed was a guaranteed buyer of corporate bonds. They would buy it, to try and essentially fix the price at a certain rate. So you knew as a bank or as a corporation or whatever that your bonds would be bought and that you would make money on that deal. But now the Fed will not be playing as direct of a role. The Fed now is just going to go back to setting the Fed funds rate, which means they can make the money that the banks have to loan out cheaper and cheaper, so that in theory should incentivize the banks to loan out money at cheaper and cheaper interest rates at near zero, or as close to zero as they can get. The Fed, of course, loans it out to the banks at actually zero. But with the Fed not longer playing a direct role in the bond market, they're not going to be able to suppress bond yields as much as they have been. Because the people who are buying the bonds now actually have to be real people. I don't think at this point, from the way I understand what Mnuchin has done, the Fed cannot just go out and purchase bonds on the open market. They also can't purchase, bond ETFs like JNK. I believe that the Fed was actually buying JNK, which is the junk bond ETF. And that obviously is the most potent medicine if you're trying to inject dollars into corporate America. Now, it's not just corporate bonds that are going to be affected, but also municipal bonds. The Fed's lending facility where they would directly buy municipal bonds, that's also going away. And so we're essentially going back to a pre-COVID monetary regime, which is to say that, of course, monetary policy is going to be extremely loose. It's going to be 0%, but the Fed is not going out there and directly buying these things. And so I'm really hesitant to call this a tightening of monetary policy, but relatively speaking, I mean, it is. As absurd as that sounds, yes, we're at 0% interest rates, and this is kind of a tightening of policy, because the Fed now will no longer be able to directly fix the interest rates of these bonds. The Fed was able to essentially target an interest rate and make sure that these bonds didn't get over 5%, let's say. They will not be able to do that now. Now, the only thing I believe that the Fed can do is buy up mortgage-backed securities and U.S. Treasuries. So traditional QE, unless Congress does something else. Because again, the only reason why I believe, because this is not totally clear, and there seems to be some confusion. And Mnuchin was out today on Jim Cramer trying to say, okay, people are confused. It doesn't exactly mean what they think they are, but I think also a lot of that is just political damage control. The Fed did not have the right to buy corporate bonds or municipal bonds before all this stuff started. And this was a power that was delegated to them through Congress via the Treasury. And so now the Fed is still able to essentially rig the housing market, and they're able to keep the U.S. federal government from collapsing, but they cannot bail out directly the municipal bonds, so state and local governments, and they are not able to bail out corporate America directly. This will take action from Congress, and this is, of course, very concerning to Wall Street. And, it is also something worth pointing out that we did not have a good unemployment read. Yes, we've been under 1 million for quite a while in weekly jobless claims, but it's remained right around 750,000. The expected number this week was 710,000, ended up being 742,000. So that that beat expectations. Put in the wrong direction. It was higher, not lower. So I don't think we're going to see an immediate. I haven't seen any immediate effects from Mnuchin announcing this, because remember, this is going to continue through the end of the year. This is going to these so-called facilities are going to expire on December 31st, and interestingly enough, this is going right into the first quarter or the first half really of 2021, when we're also expecting there to be something that's going to happen with mortgage forbearance, or with forbearance of both rent and mortgages when that expires, unless Congress somehow kicks that can down the road or just decides to forgive all federal mortgage debt. And so it's interesting that now the perpetual bailouts for state, local governments and corporations is going to be expiring at a similar time. Because the mortgage market, remember, works very differently from your corporate debt market, because corporations issue bonds. It's not so much about mortgage debt for them. A mortgage is not something that's constantly rolling over and you're constantly issuing more debt as a person. You're constantly getting a new loan and refinancing every month or every year, like corporations do, and like governments do. And so the Fed just buying mortgage-backed securities, sure, it'll keep mortgage rates down, but it's not going to bail out people who don't have the money to pay. Whereas corporations that can't pay for their bonds, they just issue new bonds to pay for their old bonds. They just borrow, they go into debt to pay off their debt. But an individual homeowner, an individual landlord, they can't do that. And so that's why this forbearance program has been key to propping up the housing market and keeping that from that house of cards from coming apart. So as far as what will happen next, the only thing that the Fed can really do right now is de facto negative interest rates. I think that they will keep the Fed funds rate, as they've said, at 0%, but they will increase QE. They likely will only do that, however, after a big stock market sell-off. That's what always gives the Fed cover to do more stuff and to print more money. And so right now it's interesting. People I don't think that the market still seems very optimistic, almost like they're pricing in the Fed, announcing a new round of QE before they've done it. Of course, the Fed doesn't have cover to do more QE until the market sells off. So it's a very I think a very precarious situation right now. Needless to say, however, I think the financial situation in the United States is in a state of, or is always getting worse. It's always in fits and starts. Things aren't always getting worse at a quick pace, but the direction is always the same. Every time there might be long pauses between movements, but the movement is always down. And no, I don't mean the movement is down in terms of like prices. Quite the opposite. I mean the movement is down in terms of the abstract concept of the health of the market or the vigor of the market. And so I will do my best to stay on top of this. Expect this to become the main issue for this channel once the whole electoral college dispute is settled. As I said, these facilities will be expiring December 31st. That is after the next president should be decided, and of course January 20th we'll know who the president is. So all of my my political stuff should be mostly settled. There's still that Georgia Senate race and stuff, and obviously I will be discussing political stuff in that I imagine Congress will be trying to come in and do some big stimulus thing to bail out when the next crash comes in, or at the start of the next crash. They'll do their best to prevent the crash from coming. So with that said, if you gain anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.